voice of Reichman University.
I think that trauma is a universal thing as well. We all carry some kind of trauma, but we fail to listen to its music because we're so engaged of getting rid of these parts. We live in a culture that wants to feel good all the time. And if there's one mistake I think parents make these days is to work for this happiness or feel good all the time.
Welcome to Raw, a podcast where we confront the complexities of war from the inside out. I'm Anouk, a journalist, author, yoga teacher, and meditation practitioner. Raw, or war spelled backwards, symbolizes how many of us feel in the face of the Israel-Gaza conflict: exposed, vulnerable, and seeking understanding. Here, we don't just discuss the external battles, but dive deep into our internal struggles, examining how this violence has shaken our very core. Join me in conversations with philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual leaders as we explore how to navigate these painful times with wisdom and resilience, finding guidance for our own paths through this raw, unfiltered world. Joining us on the podcast today is Einat Natan, arguably the most recognized Israeli parenting expert, a beacon of wisdom and humor for families far and wide. She comes with a wealth of experience not only in parenting, but also in guiding others through the intricate dance of raising children. Einat is a best-selling author whose book, Chaim Sheli, resonates deeply with parents, selling over 60,000 copies. Einat's journey into parenting was shaped by profound personal experiences, including the heartbreaking loss of twins through stillbirth, a pivotal moment that deepened her compassion and understanding of the complexities of parenthood. Now she's the proud mother of 5, sharing her life in Tel Aviv with her husband and children. With Einat's help, we delve into her advice for parents navigating these heartbreaking times, providing a roadmap for resilience and stability amidst chaos. Einat, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Your first birth, you gave birth to twins, and they were stillborn. You seem like a very resilient person, whether, it comes from that tremendous loss that you've had to overcome, or being a mother of 5 children. You have a very successful career as a parenting expert. People from everywhere in Israel turn to you. Did that resilience carry you through October 7th and the months since then?
I'm the first one to break. I think that breaking is a part of being resilient. It doesn't it doesn't go without it. Uh, and and it's funny because one of the big struggles of new parents is accepting their children, breaking, meeting negative emotions, disappointing, struggling, meeting adversity. And it's actually the fear of meeting these emotions inside ourselves. So I'm the first one to break, always. The first one to break in movies, the first one to break in tears in the car, the first one. I think that breaking is, such a huge thing with resilience. It's like the tears are our blessing. 3 days into the war, I got a few phone calls from the IDF, and I was kind of recruited to help families in frontline, families of officers, the evicted families that were just, lost everything and went with small children, big children, you know, Passover is coming. It was like,
Exodus.
leaving. Yeah. Yeah. I was, you know, 24/7 just reaching out, working, holding broken hearts.
How did you navigate this with your own children? Because you're working with these families and you're working with children who have lost a lot. And then you have your own children who are in Tel Aviv, who are in a relative safety.
The best thing that I'm good at is joy, seriously. And I think that it comes hand in hand with sorrow and with grief. My children were, a part of this saved paradise of just happy and joy.
I think I'm a little bit like you, and I'm really very devoted to joy. And I think that maybe comes with people who feel all feelings quite strongly. I don't shut the door to grief and loss and anxiety and rage, but I'm really loving and dedicated to joy. And so, even in the midst of the first few weeks after October 7th, once I'd gotten over my kind of fight, flight, freeze mode, which did last a few days, I think I danced with my kids more than ever.
It's a duty. I remember my firstborn, Eyal, is 24. The stillbirth happened a year before he was born. So it was a stillbirth of twins. And in that room, when I was able to laugh between, the cry and the unimaginable, sorrow, when I was able to laugh, but really laugh, I knew that we would be fine. You don't have to hide reality from your children in order to protect them from something that you're trying to protect yourself from. And my third daughter, she was recruited to the army. She's 18 years old, and she was a new soldier when the war broke. And she told me with her sense of humor, Mom, do you remember that every time that I wanted to quit, ballet or after school activities, you always said we had this bullet points of checking. Am I enjoying? How are the friends? Is it hard, but not too hard? Is it of my interest? She went through all these bullet points and she said, and you always let us quit. So now I want to quit. I don't like this 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 after school activity. No fun, no friends. The teacher is not nice. They're shouting, and I want to go home. And she was crying and laughing, because she knew that this is the stage where she can't go home. And it was such an amazing, gift to be on the other side of the line and to hear this baby, young woman, whatever, teenager, because that's who they are at that age, making sense of everything. of humor, adversity, sadness, lack of control at the age, that many people just, get drunk.
When you look at the children or even the adults in our society who were children, does it sometimes feel hopeless to you? Because we know that so many people were brought up in ways that did not validate their reality and did not allow for their emotions to be held and seen and accepted, and did not have healthy, accepting boundaries put in place. And they grew up and become adults who have no awareness of their thoughts and
Adults
actions.
who make wars,
Yes. Do you feel
right?
absolutely? They grow up and become adults who go to war and dehumanize others and invalidate their realities and refuse to look at their own pain, shame, fear, guilt. Do you feel hopeful or hopeless at this point in time?
Okay, I'm always hopeful. I'm a tragic optimistic. But at the same time, I think that I'm very, look, I'm very aware, and I think that's the thing with meeting so many facts in your life that you can't control too early on. So I have this power of the ability to let go of things that I cannot change. I think that when you concentrate on the things that you can change, and when you really, really let go with no criticism or, binary aspect of, who's right and who's wrong. It's kind of like looking at nature. It's kind of like, understanding that there are greater forces than us, and this too shall pass. And the only thing that I do have control over is my, doorstep, or the way that I look at people, all people, with compassion and with this look of believing in good nature.
This war, I'm traversing it with kids that could potentially still not be fully aware of what's going on. And I heard a parenting expert in Australia like a few months ago, not related to the war. He said, young children, if you want them to become adults who care about changing the world, they have to believe in the goodness of the world. And so, because parents were asking him about whether they should talk to their kids about climate change and about, racism and all of that. And he said, if you can, show your children the beauty of the world, especially when they're small, so that they grow up wanting to protect it. And so I've kind of been a little bit torn about how much my children should be aware of what's happening so close to here and what's happened to, so many around us. But sometimes I also feel guilty for kind of completely sheltering them and them being in this bubble where, everything is just continuing as normal. So I was wondering.
I love this question. Small children are not, fragile. In a sense, nature, by, not developing their brain in fully for 25 years, took care of the position that I can be the storyteller. And I think that sometimes we forget that the best stories, by the way, that our children are attracted to are the true, are the fantasy story that they can digest, no problem. Monsters, witches, bad guys, superheroes, whatever it is. But it's always in the context of knowing the happy end that good will, provide. So I have no problem mediating ugliness and evil in the outside world, which, by the way, for young children is like hearing the story of Exodus or whatever's far and away, just depends on how we tell the story.
I wanted to ask you, if you can share maybe like an experience that you've had in the past few months where you met with a family or you met with children who, like a moment that stayed with you that kind of maybe defines what it means to be a parent in these times.
One of them was the mother seemed very anxious, but she kind of refused to admit that, it's something of the things that her children detect. And she kept on holding to the fact that, they're not talking about the war. There's no news at the house. There's the sirens, of course, and they're going to the shelter, but there's no tension around the thing. And then I've asked what the child knows. What did they talk about the war? She said, actually, nothing. The husband by that point started to laugh a bit. And I've asked, why is he laughing? And then he looked at the mom and said, don't you want to tell her the story about our friends from Berry?
From Kibbutz Be'eri, which was attacked on
From
October
Kibbutz
7th.
Berry. And she said, I'm not sure it's related, but you can tell. So what I've discovered is that they had a couple from Berry. They were like longtime friends. They used to hang out at summers. They went to the kibbutz and the kids were together, and one of their children died and the other one was kidnapped. The father was a good friend of the husband, and they kind of took him in. So he was visiting the family on and off, like once a week, bringing treats to the children, and the mother asked not to talk about it. So he visited usually in the evenings before they went to bed, and they sat outside and they talked about it while the children were sleeping.
So the guy from Kibbutz Be'eri was visiting, and one of his children had been killed and the other kidnapped?
Yeah. I've asked, why do you think that your children don't know? I mean, they probably don't know the facts, but they're feeling that something has happened on the personal level and on the, major level, like outside, universal level, and no one's talking about it. And maybe you should. And I've suggested it gently to see if they pick up. And the mother refused. And I gave them a week to think about it. And that week, she escalated.
The daughter.
Ticks. She began to tics, and they took her to therapy, some kind of behavioral, I don't know, imagining therapy. The therapist gave her in one session a couple of tips so she can imagine, I don't know, the tension is a drop on a leaf and it's, sliding away. And they canceled our next session. And after 2 weeks, she escalated again. By that time, she didn't want to get out of the room. She didn't want to go to school. They didn't talk about anything. And they surrendered to the advice of, not before they asked if maybe I could talk to her. And I explained the importance of, them being the storytellers, them giving, both of them. And I try to explain that it doesn't matter the words that they're going to say, because children, they have a seismograph of the subtext, the anxiety, the fears, the concern, the worries. We met again before they were able to sit down with an 8-year-old girl and tell her that something is happening. I think the point of this story, I think there's a couple of points, okay? One, sometimes we think we protect our children when actually we pour small drops of poison, really small drops of poison, by not sharing our thoughts, our fears, our uncertainty, not from a viewpoint of, I need you to save me, but from an optimistic or, leading viewpoint of, this is what's happening. We're scared as well. We are not certain when it will be over. We're sure it will have an epic ending. But now we feel so many feelings, We're happy, and then we feel guilty of being happy because something awful happened to a lot of people. And then we're sad and we just want the sadness to go away. And then we're scared. But we ask ourselves, what are we scared of? The hard part is over. The bad guys are not here. And then we remember, just stepping into a 4-year-old, 8-year-old, 12-year-old, 16-year-old, 53-year-old person and tapping into the best or the most optimistic message that they need to hear in order to feel safe. And then according to this, reverse engineer it and legitimize every feeling on the way, including the one that I'm supposed to have all the answers and I don't, right? And when I'm saying that to a child with tears in my eyes or with my voice stumbling, then maybe I shouldn't say anything. But when I sit in front of a child and I know what I'm saying, and the music of the words sounds like any other story that I've ever told him, of grandmother when she was a child, of, stories that we've read to them, anything. And I think it's very hard for parents to grasp that the small drops of poison, they amount to something very burdening and very big that children can't handle. The small drops of poison are the gap between what we're saying or not saying and what we're actually feeling and experiencing. If I have an anxiety about something, I'm not talking about war. If I'm fighting with their father, okay, they need to hear it within the context of, you know, we're fighting now. I'm very mad. I wish we could fight when you were sleeping, but hey, I trust that you know that we love each other. I will make sure that you see when we make up and when we go back to not being crazy. And here are your choices. And I'm here if you want to ask me something.
That's something that I did learn, and I think I'm much better with my second and my third at being very open about my emotions if I'm feeling very strong emotions, or if I'm very tired and therefore I have less patience and I snap at my kids. I might say, listen guys,
Yeah.
sorry I snapped, but I'm very tired. But with this war, the insanity, the incomprehensibility of what happened was so extreme that I wasn't prepared. I didn't know what to tell my children. And my son, who's 8, for a few years, his worst fear was kidnapping. He would always ask me, but are children kidnapped? Does it happen? And I would say things like, Leo, it doesn't happen in Israel. Don't worry about it. It doesn't happen here. And then he would say things like, where does it happen? And I would think, okay, where can I tell him that it happens? Because he knows that kidnappings exist. That is nowhere that we're ever going to visit. And so I would say like these countries, maybe it happens there, maybe it happens there, but we would never visit there and it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And when the war broke out, children, not to mention women, men, elderly people, were kidnapped.
Yeah.
And we left for a few weeks. So for a few weeks, we didn't really talk about the war. We said, there was a war in Israel and we're going to go back when it's safer. And we didn't talk about it much. And then we came back to Israel and there were fewer missiles. So he went to school. I kept asking him, do people talk about the war at school? And he said no. And I was relatively calm. And he was relatively calm. So I thought, why am I going to take him aside and say, Leo, do you know that there are kidnapped children in Gaza? Of course not. But we would drive by these posters. And then I would kind of quickly try to point the finger to, show him something in another direction. And then, he would hear things like Chatufim. And he asked me once, what does that mean, Chatufim? And I'm people in war who, there are unfortunately people were killed at the beginning of the war, but now, our army is defending us and you're safe, etc. And a few weeks ago, or it was already a couple months ago, we were walking towards the library. Him and I like to go to the library together near the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. And I completely forgot that in front of the library is the Kikar HaChatufim, the hostage square of the families. Wow. And I'm walking out of the parking lot with him. And we arrive. They have a makeshift tunnel, which looks exactly like a tunnel, in Gaza. There are hundreds and hundreds of posters. He can read in English and in Hebrew, kidnapped, chatuf. And he looks at it and he's like, what is it? Are there people who were kidnapped? And I wish I had you then, to mediate and to tell me what I should say. And I said, yes, unfortunately, some people were kidnapped, and there are still some people there, but we're going to get them out. But he probably felt that I was very uncomfortable and that I hesitated whether to tell him the truth or not. Knowing him,
he could see
He's too
right through
smart
me.
yeah, of course.
And then I walked straight into the library and we talked about other things. And I'm wondering, is there at any point where you would have said, listen, Anouk, there's so likely that he's going to hear about kidnappings that at the beginning of the war, should I have sat him down and told him this is the reality that we live in? Or because he was fine, I'm fine, and he's not suffering from anxiety. These are
I'll tell you,
such
yeah,
complicated.
they are complicated, but then they're simple. And I'll tell you why. First of all, children, they're very egoistic, right? So in a good way, they're not concerned with the world. They're concerned with anything that can affect them or us. This is it. If we have pets, the pets also. Okay? The things they are connected to, like their blankie or their, possessions or the things that they're attached to. And this is really nature being a genius by telling us no matter what happens, your children are safe as long as you're safe, or as long as you can give them the best story of, us being together, nothing happening to anyone that we love or cherish or need. And then they can receive details, information like any other stories, like story about bad guys, superheroes, kidnappers, thieves, evil, good, whatever. Okay? Really, think about, Bambi. His mother burned in the forest. I don't know, Hansel and Gretel. They were, I think she wanted to eat them. We are wired not to survive. We are wired to be together, to be close, and through this, we survive. So when a gap opens between me and my children, I'm not saying something, I'm not sharing something. We are not as close as we could have been, right? And children feel this gap. They don't know what it means. And here comes the second cycle of egoism, and it says, and we know this, from studying abused children, they always take things personal. They always think it's something about them. They don't suspect, no child ever said, well, my parent was having a hard time. She was trying to protect me. She was doing her best. She didn't. I'm her firstborn. She didn't imagine that I will meet Einat's fifth child, and she will share every detail, every graphic detail of this war with me. So what they're saying is, maybe something is wrong with me, that they're distancing. And if they're distancing and something is wrong with me, I need to do something to hold on. And children do all kinds of things to hold on or not to think about, the gap or the feeling of closeness they used to feel and now's gone because, mom is depressed or dad is away because no one talked about someone in the family being sick or being kidnapped. So if we look at it from their viewpoint, when they're saying I'm afraid of, for example, kidnapping, they're actually saying, please, mom, can you tell me it's normal to be afraid of kidnapping? And what do we answer? There's nothing to be afraid of. It's far away. We do everything in our power, either, to transport them from the bad emotion to a positive one, or to make sure it's clear that the emotion that they're feeling is not the right one because of different facts. While all we need to do is look at them and say, wow, me too. Tell me more. What do you think? How did you think about kidnapping? Like, what is your worst fear? When you're sleeping and someone is, sneaking in our house? No, no one can sneak in our house. Let's talk about it. Why are we so afraid? When they send us an invitation to talk about any negative emotion, if it's fear, if it's sadness, if it's disappointment, if it's frustration, why can't we stay in this moment without a transcript when all we need to do is be curious about it? And keep in mind that we do need to provide after, letting them feel normal. We do need to provide the happy ending, not of, world peace. It just needs to be some sort of a fact that goes hand in hand, and we will never be separated. You will never be lost. I will never be distant.
It's so interesting to me because with each child, and as the months and the years go by of motherhood, I'm learning more. And this is something I have heard it before, to be present for the negative emotions, to make space for them.
Wow.
That wow that you said, wow, you're really feeling very angry, or wow, seems like you're very scared about that. And yet, as you're talking, I realize for most adults, most parents, we are not inherently comfortable with the little beings that we love the most in the universe having feelings that in all likelihood our own parents, because we know what that generation was mostly like, in all likelihood our own parents weren't so comfortable with us having. So I just remembered now that my biggest fear as a child was being kidnapped, because where I grew up in Antwerp, in Belgium, there was a guy called Marc Dutroux who kidnapped and killed many girls, and did other horrible things to them. And I remember hearing about it on the television and getting really scared. And we wouldn't talk about it with my parents, but they got me this little alarm that I would stick in my jeans and pull the trigger, and would make this atrocious noise if I even wanted to go as far as to, play with chalk in front of the door.
It's amazing to hear that he was kind of reenacting for you something that happened in your childhood. in order, for this correction to happen and for the chain to stop, for you not going to this solution or to the, don't worry.
Yeah, because, it more than I think it healing him, it healed me. Because when we ended up in this hostage square and he said, "What is this? All these people are kidnapped?" And I said what I said. A lot of these children have come back, but some are still there, and we're going to get them. We're going to find them. We'll do everything we can. And he was like, "Okay, can I have a cookie?" Literally. I mean, he didn't say it like 2 seconds later. He thought about it. There were like a few seconds. We walked into the library and he said, "Mommy, can I have a cookie?" And then we went and we borrowed books. And it was a meaningful moment. It was
Because
a
he
nice
was
moment
relieved.
between us.
And
I was relieved
Yeah.
to see him not falling apart over the knowledge that people are kidnapped.
It's amazing. And I think that one of the biggest complaints of parents is, my child is not good with frustration. Okay? My child is not good in, these big emotion, in regulation, in. So first of all, I ask every parent, how are you with a frustrated child? Because it's frustrating, right? And here's the model. If we go fix it, then we didn't teach any regulation. So this would be the basic step of, just being able to witness everything in them and to acknowledge that sometimes it's the opposite of our instinct. Because, when we hold them as babies and they're wrapped in the blanket, in the hospital blanket, there is a promise there, you'll cry and I'll make everything okay. You'll cry and I'll feed you. You'll cry and I'll cuddle you. You'll cry and I'll help you sleep. But they grow up and we forget that, that psychological contract needs to change, because then they feel helpless or crazy or, all of these much worse emotions that they can't even name. So this is the best option of protecting them, because the other alternatives are much worse.
I take away from our conversation this conviction that I have and that I have had, but that I keep having to remind myself that the bottom line is that all feelings are welcome and all feelings are human.
This is it.
And I
This
think
is parenthood A to Z. This is it.
I think if parents could not only apply that to their children, but to themselves, then we have the jackpot. If I can look at myself and say, I'm jealous sometimes. I am. I look at Instagram. I look at that person going on holiday there.
Yeah.
I look at this person having that, and that person in that moment, I'm not thinking, but there are people starving in Gaza but then I feel very guilty for having those feelings. And then I try to shut them down. And then I try to pretend that I don't have them. And then if I have all kinds of feelings that I don't find acceptable in myself, how can I find them acceptable in my children? And I'm suggesting that the more I can learn to find them acceptable in myself, not ideal, because it doesn't feel good to feel jealous. But if I can look at myself and say, gosh, Anouk, you're feeling a little jealous, then those feelings also, they get reduced, they get softened.
Do you remember when we were teenagers? And you're younger, but I used to have a cassette. It was the crying cassette, okay? When you enter your room and you press the play button and you hear all this music that makes you cry. I mean, you don't know what you're crying about. If we don't give permission to ourselves and to them to hurt, then we can't enjoy the bitter sweet of everything, of sadness,
The
of
release.
life, of, you know, and when children cry and you smile with empathy, it's like the first time. It doesn't happen on the first child, but when you get the deal, and suddenly your second or your third, goes through this stage of, being insulted for the first time. Okay? And you watch him from a distance, the chin starting to tremble, and you go there, and there is something in you that smiles and said, "Oh my God, it's the first time that you're insulted." It's one more emotion to collect until we're fully human. Music always does that. I think that, they say that it's a universal thing, but I think that trauma is a universal thing as well. We all carry some kind of trauma, but we fail to listen to its music because we're so engaged of getting rid of these parts, because we live in a culture that wants to feel good all the time. And if there's one mistake I think parents make these days, is to work for this happiness or feel good all the time. It's so wrong, because it robs our children from the most amazing thing in life. Seriously, if I can wish something, I remember that my firstborn, I told you that he was diagnosed with autism and he was struggling. He's still struggling. We struggle, and he insisted on joining the army like everyone else, and we got into a program that drafted kids with autism. And when I sat down to write something for him before the night he was drafted to the army, I wished him to have a hard time. I wished him to have a hard time, not too hard, but hard enough to reach out and to find good people and to find strength within himself and to overcome and to share with us. And I really think that we kind of need to wish them hardship, along with all the good things that we wish for.
That was a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Einat. I really appreciate it.
I will write, but I want to thank you oh my God, I feel so, I want to hear you for an hour and a half now, because I feel that
I would be happy,
Thank you.
When if ever you have time to meet for coffee. Thank you for listening. This has been Raw. To listen to more of our episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. I'm Anouk Glory. Goodbye.